Welcome to the Podkey summary of Troilus. Troilus starts out in ancient myth as a doomed boy whose death helps explain why Troy is fated to fall, and over time he turns into something very different depending on who's telling the story. His story survives in a strangely patchwork way, with missing poems, contradictory scraps, and a whole lot of pottery doing backup duty for lost literature. And then, later writers remake him again, first into a chivalric warrior, then into the betrayed lover of Cressida, and finally, in modern retellings, back into a vulnerable young person caught in the machinery of war. In the ancient tradition, Troilus matters way beyond his page count, because a prophecy says Troy won't fall if he reaches 20. So, when Achilles kills him early, that murder doesn't just remove one prince. It tells you, right from the start, that Trojan resistance is already broken at the level of fate. The standard version is brutal. Achilles ambushes Troilus and his sister Polyxena at a fountain, chases Troilus into Apollo's sanctuary, and kills him at the altar. Some versions also make the scene sexually threatening, with Troilus rejecting or escaping Achilles' advances before the killing. That makes the whole thing feel even uglier, because it's not simply combat, it's predation. Ancient writers and artists treat it as both child murder and sacrilege. Achilles kills a beautiful adolescent in a sacred place, and Apollo eventually helps Paris kill Achilles in return. So Troilus's death becomes part of a chain of revenge built right into the myth. The boy dies, Troy is doomed, and Achilles signs his own sentence too. Even the name Troilus seems loaded. Scholars connect it either to Troy's founders, Tros and Ilos, or to a blend of Troy and destroy, which is a pretty heavy thing to carry around as a teenager. One reason Troilus keeps changing is that the ancient record is a mess in the most fascinating way. Major early treatments are lost, including the Cypria and Sophocles' Troilus, so a lot of this story has to be reconstructed from summaries, scholia, stray references, and visual evidence. And the surviving sources do not make life easy. They disagree about his age, his parentage, where he dies, and exactly how Achilles kills him. Even a Homeric word attached to him, hippiokarmein, can point in different directions. It might mean he's fond of horses, or it might suggest a mounted warrior. That kind of uncertainty matters because it changes the whole feel of the character. Is he basically a child at a watering place, or someone at least partly legible as a fighter? A lot of the reconstruction actually comes from art. Troilus's ambush and death show up on at least 108 pieces of Attic pottery from the 6th through 4th centuries BC. So pottery isn't just decoration here, it's evidence. Almost like the visual archive stepped in when the texts fell apart. Viewers could recognize the scene from recurring details like the two horses, the dropped water jar, a raven linked with Apollo, or a cock that seems to work as a love gift. Which is a nice reminder that ancient audiences often knew these stories so well they didn't need labels. A broken jar and a bird could do a lot of narrative work. In ancient myth, Troilus is mostly a beautiful and vulnerable boy, and the emotional center is grief, especially parental grief. Medieval writers take that figure and rebuild him into almost the opposite, a major warrior, a virtuous pagan knight, and after Hector, Troy's next great military hope. In those versions, he's brave, loyal, courtly, and sometimes credited with killing thousands of Greeks, which is a long way from the earlier image of a minor or passive warrior. That shift owes a lot to Dares the Phrygian and related medieval traditions that retell the Trojan War in the language of chivalry. Once the war starts looking like a knightly epic, Troilus has to behave like a knight too. His values get updated to fit the moral and social expectations of a different age. Even then, there's a built-in ceiling. He often becomes the second Hector, which raises him up, while also quietly saying he isn't quite the real thing. Then the 12th century adds the story most people now associate with his name, Troilus and Cressida. That romance shifts his identity again. He stops being defined mainly by what Achilles does to him and becomes a courtly lover shaped by constancy, longing, and betrayal. Cressida is the daughter of Calchas, a Trojan priest who defects to the Greeks. She's later sent across the lines in a hostage exchange, and once she's there, her affection turns toward Diomedes. So now, the fall of Troy includes a love triangle, and Troilus' personal loss mirrors the city's larger collapse. Writers keep revisiting this because the ending is awkward in a very human way. Troilus eventually dies at Achilles' hands. Diomedes lives, and Cressida more or less slips out of the story. Boccaccio, Chaucer, Henryson, Shakespeare, and Dryden all rework that shape, partly because the original setup leaves emotional business unfinished. Shakespeare goes especially hard in the cynical direction. Troilus clings to the idea of perfect fidelity while watching Cressida get drawn to Diomedes, and the play mocks almost everything around him. The romance, the heroic posturing, the Trojan War itself, all of it starts to look compromised, performative, or simply ridiculous. A lot of modern retellings circle back to the older Troilus, the vulnerable man-boy rather than the armored medieval champion. His youth becomes the point, because it lets writers focus on what war does to adolescents before they ever get the chance to become stable, heroic figures. That makes him different from characters like Ulysses or Hamlet, who can absorb suffering and turn into durable cultural types. Troilus often can't do that. He gets broken by forces bigger than himself. In Christa Wolf's Cassandra, the ancient sexualized violence and the war story are fused together. Achilles' killing of Troilus becomes an assault that exposes how violence and sexuality are entangled. And then you get playful rebellion against the fatal script. In Doctor Who's The Mythmakers, Troilus survives the fall of Troy, marries the woman he loves, and even kills Achilles. That's such a sharp reversal because it hands agency back to a figure who usually exists to be hunted, betrayed, or mourned. Troilus is one of those characters who shows how myths stay alive by refusing to stay still. A sacrificial prince, a second Hector, a betrayed lover, a war-damaged boy, and occasionally, if a time machine shows up, a survivor. That's a pretty remarkable afterlife for someone whose story spent so long in pieces. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.
Podcast.